Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday and happy February. I can't believe it's already February. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We're going to go ahead and get started um, for our second to last virtual session for the year. This is session number 4 of our CSI series. And today we're focusing on using walkthrough data to take informed action. It's nice to see your lovely faces this morning. If you happen to be new today, my name is Nimisha Thakur, Director of Academics here at TNTP. And we also have on the call Abby Robinson, who you'll see dropping things into the chat throughout the session. If you have a logistical question or need something, Abby is the best person to message in the chat. So if you want to send a direct message to someone for like, I need a link or whatever, Abby's your girl. You can send it to me too, but I'll be facilitating, so it might be a little harder for me to respond to you quickly. And then we also have Nadia, our dear friend Nadia, on the call, but she is under the weather today. So she's going to stay off camera. You might see her responding in the chat and popping into some breakouts throughout, but I will be our main facilitator today to give Nadia's voice a little bit of a break, which she has lost this week. So send Nadia all of your healing vibes. That would be much appreciated. Okay, so our housekeeping items are the same as always. As I'm talking through this, please make sure you've opened all the right things. Make sure that you've signed in and that you've downloaded the participant handout, either from Google Classroom, or Abby is also going to drop a link in the chat for the handout if you need direct access. And then once you've got all of that done, take a minute to update your Zoom username with your school district and, school district or ESU. If you're in person with a group of people, please indicate that in your username. As in all of our previous sessions, we're going to have breakout rooms set up by school a little bit later today, so your naming conventions will be helpful to us. I'm going to pause here for a minute just to let everybody get situated. And if you need help finding or accessing anything, let us know in the chat. All right, we'll keep it moving. We have to start with an icebreaker. I was in charge of this one today, so if it's not as good as usual, it's because I did it, not you didn't. What we're gonna do for this quick icebreaker, it's called What Do You See? I'm gonna show a series of images on this slide for about 10 seconds. So it's pretty quick. And what I'd love for you to do is, as fast as you can, just share in the chat quickly what you see on first glance in the image. So get your fingers ready over your keyboard, ready to just type in immediately what you see and hit enter. Don't overthink it. Don't look too hard. Just type what you see. Are we ready? See some nodding. All right. Image number 1. Image number 2. Image number 3. Image number 4. And image number 5. All right. That was 10 seconds, but I'm gonna leave this image here. Take a second to just scroll back up through the chat and look at what other people shared for any of these images. And then I'd love to hear from someone. Feel free to come off mute or you can share in the chat. Are you surprised or confused by any of the answers that you're seeing in the chat? What do we think? Does any of this surprise you or confuse you? Did you see something different and you're like, what? I see a comment about the cheesecake image. Yes, this is a cheesecake with a slice missing. Not an ocean with a boat like I originally thought. And this, yes, is a like looking through a scope picture of a marsh or a wetland maybe, and not a planet.
Whoever put snow puppy, I thought that was genius. That was really good. Whoever put that down as a pumpkin.
What did you see on that one, Joe?
A mountain.
A mountain. Yeah, I can't not. I only see a dog mountain in this picture. Like I can't see anything else. Any others? This one, I think most of us got it, but there's actually a black cat right here sitting on a chair. It's not just a broken chair. If you look at it quickly, it looks like it's just broken. This one, we had a wide range. All right, does anyone want to take a stab at what connection could this exercise possibly have to a session on data analysis?
Perspectives.
Go ahead, Joe.
Perspectives, just the way we're looking at data and how we interpret it.
Yeah, Heather, you want to add to that?
I was just going to say, if you glance at data too quickly, you might not get the whole picture.
Love that.
I would say that looking at data takes out opinion or feelings, better perspective.
Love it. Y'all get a little deeper than I did, but the connection that I wanted to highlight here is kind of what Joe was naming. We all bring our own unique lived experiences and perspectives and all kinds of other baggage to how we make sense of these pictures and of the world, right? Consciously or not. We might not be actively thinking, here's why I think this, but how we perceive anything is influenced by the entire rest of our lives, right? Which is unique to just ourselves. So the same is true for when we look at data, right? Which we're going to see throughout today's session. We could all be looking at the exact same data set, but highlight different gaps that we see in the data set or problem solve for a particular gap in a distinct or unique way. And that is totally okay. What we land on from a data set, what we land on to problem solve for will vary based on context. But how we think about and act on the data is what's most important and what we're going to be zeroing in on today. That process of how to think about and act on data. All right, back through these pictures. Okay, so some objectives for today. Believe it or not, we are rounding home on our time together. After today, we've got some diagnostic site visits for a few of your schools. in March, and then we have one more session in April, and that wraps up our year together. Since September, we've defined instructional coaching, we've explored the components of coaching cycles, we've practiced observing for strong instruction and facilitating feedback conversations that push teachers' thinking. And today, we're going to get a little more tactical and think about how to leverage instructional coaching data to make intentional shifts beyond the classroom level. So over the next few hours today, we are going to analyze the findings of current walkthrough data to identify common instructional need. We'll strategize how to leverage district, ESU, and/or state level support to address gaps. And we will start to develop aligned actions to address the gap that we identify from that data. So knowing that those are our objectives for today and that we're digging into walkthrough data analysis, take a second to skim over our norms and think about which one or two you want to prioritize, and feel free to drop it in the chat. All right, thank you for sharing. So a quick recap of session 3 before we jump into new content. So in session 3, we explored how to use inquiry to drive coaching forward. We defined all coaching as dialogic. So all coaching is a conversation between the coach and the coachee, where the dial during that conversation might continuously shift from more facilitative to more directive, depending on the circumstances and context. We practiced reflective listening to get to the root of what might be hindering a teacher's progress. And we also practiced asking cathartic and confrontational questions to help the coachee process emotions and push their thinking. So in both session 3 and the previous session, we have focused a lot on coaching at the classroom level, right? What moves can we make as leaders to develop a particular teacher so that students in that classroom can receive stronger instruction? But as we talked about all the way back in session 1, we know that instructional coaching also has the potential for school-wide impact, which we're going to talk about today. So we're going to be zooming out from the classroom level today to practice using all the data you might gather from instructional coaching cycles to practice making strategic shifts at the school level or for certain groups of teachers. So instead of just saying, hey, this teacher needs to work on this, identifying, hey, all of our teachers, there seems to be a common struggle in this area. What can I do about it at the school level? All right, so to do that, we're going to take some time to activate sort of our prior skills and knowledge that we all bring to the table when it comes to analyzing school data, because we all do that probably multiple times every day, constantly. So we're bringing a lot of skill sets to this. So we're going to kind of dig into some of that first and clearly define our focus for today. So we're going to start by sharing what we already know and do. In your participant handout, you have these exact prompts in your handout. We're going to give you 3 minutes to independently respond to them before we send you to breakout rooms to discuss. So even if you're in person with people, take these 3 minutes to just independently jot down your own thoughts. When looking at a data set, what steps do you take to analyze it? Any data set. And then do you think that there should be core principles that all leaders in education should use when looking at data? Why or why not? We'll take 3 minutes of independent time. All right, in just a moment, Abby is going to open up some breakout rooms. In your breakout rooms, the partner whose name is last alphabetically can share first. And go ahead and share your responses to these questions. And then when we come back whole group, we'll open the floor for some whole group sharing. All right, Abby, whenever you're ready. All right, let's open it up to some whole group sharing. I have some questions up here. Did your partner have a strong list of like what they look for when they're analyzing data? And if they did, feel free to nominate them to share out whole group. So let's start there. Did you hear anything great about what to look for when analyzing data?
We talked about, when looking at data, we have a report that we can print from our report cards data that's called a gainer sticker slider. So it tells us which students are gaining from quarter to quarter, which students have stayed the same, and then which students have gone down from quarter to quarter. And we can look at that data over the course of a year.
And that's in terms of, sorry, which data is that? Like their
Report
the grades
cards.
that teachers
Yeah.
are putting, okay.
Yep.
got it.
Correlate with school improvement.
And then that all correlates with our school improvement goals.
Can you say more about that last part?
So we use that data and that report to help with our school improvement goals and where we need to go as a building or with teams and kids.
Comprehensive.
If we
What
need
kids,
to,
are we moving in the right direction?
Yeah. Yeah.
Got it.
And if we're not, how will we address?
Did anyone have a conversation where what you shared with your partner was very different than what they shared with you? So we're on question 2 here. Were the things that how you approach data analysis, was that very different than how your partner approaches it? I'd love to hear about that. I'm gonna call on the group that I popped into. I think it was Amy and Cindy. I think when I popped in, you guys were talking about how you look at data differently, or you look at different data sets, something like that. Would one of you mind sharing?
Yeah, so we had a conversation. Oh,
Go ahead, Ange.
I'm from an ESU, so when we hold data reviews, we are bringing school districts in and we're looking at it kind of from a bird's eye view, looking at, at least a year's worth of data and trends over time, and progress towards continuous improvement goals. And Cindy is from Maywood, a single district, and coming out of the classroom for 33 years. She is now more in an instructional leadership coach role where she's going into classrooms and using that core rubric and focusing on engagement this year. So she's really drilling down to that classroom level. And Cindy, did I leave anything out? Anything you want to share?
No, that's about right. I just go in there to make sure that the teachers, or I should say the kids, are engaged using the Teach Like a Champion strategies and stuff like that.
I love that you're calling out like data isn't just like assessment data, right? It also includes what you're seeing in classrooms. I love that. Let's talk. Anyone else want to share for things that were different? Let's talk about this last question. Do you think that there should be some core principles that all leaders in education should use when looking at data? And if so, what are those?
I guess we talked in our partnership about how it really is important to understand that there is a story behind the data set. My partner talked specifically like about attendance. Does attendance, what are those factors that the schools have already tried? What are the stories behind why students are not getting there? Is it weather? Is it illnesses? Is it family trauma? Numbers are numbers, but there's the stories behind it. So they're not excuses, but they are stories.
I'll piggyback off of what Melanie just said in our breakout. The two partners that I was talking with, they've been to data-driven dialogue training like many ESU people on here have, but talking about the students last, just thinking about there might be some other causal factors, curriculum, instruction, teachers' knowledge and skill, the infrastructure of scheduling and et cetera. But coming to that last factor of students' knowledge and skill last, because there might be other root causes involved when we're looking at data.
Hear from at least one more person. I know y'all were having some good conversations in your breakouts.
Go ahead. No, Omaha, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. We just said that we definitely feel like there needs to be decision rules when looking at data, and then there needs to be enough data. You need to make sure that you're not trying to make decisions off of just like 1 or 2 points of data. And I think other people have said kind of looking at the whole picture as well. So we need to just keep all of those things in mind. And that's where those decision rules come in handy, and they help you kind of guide your obviously decisions, but then deciding like, should we even do anything? Is there enough information? So that was just kind of one of the main things we talked about.
Thank you for sharing. Do you mind like defining for us when you say decision rules, what you mean by that, and maybe giving an example?
Yeah, so for example, our PBIS, when we look at behavior entries and we meet with our tier 2 teams, we pull up students within the last month if they've had 3 minors 3 majors or 6 minors. So those are the kids that we focus on. So if kids only have 1 entry, we're not even going to talk about them at that point. We're just kind of narrowing it down based on those decision rules.
Thank you. That's super helpful. So you have established like bars of.
Yeah,
This
and
is
we do
what
it
we're-
for a variety of areas, Ames Web, like I said, the behavior stuff. So we do try to put those rules in place to help us narrow it down.
Love it. Sarah, do you want to share?
Her answer was much better than mine. Mine was just kind of reiterating what Kelly had said about making sure we're asking why. And I think that goes to the decision rules as well. Like we can't just, pick one data point and move. We need to make sure we're looking at all the different factors that could be influencing the data point to make sure we've considered everything before we make any decisions.
Love it. Thank you for sharing. A lot of what you guys are sharing right now around things that we should all be practicing are what we're going to put into practice today. Asking why, digging into those root causes, putting some decision rules in place to help us figure out what can we do something about. We're going to practice all of that today. Thank you guys for sharing. Can I get, let's see, who do I want to call on? Miss Kelly from Huntington, would you mind coming off mute and reading out this quote for us?
Meeting the needs of every student requires a constant process of understanding students' learning journey, the root causes of challenges, and how to provide appropriate support that addresses those root causes. Data-based decision-making involves communication and collaboration from the community and caregivers, as well as the district, school, collaborative, and student support teams using a variety of data points to identify student needs and support planning.
Thank you. For those of you, I think there's a few people here who have attended some of our statewide professional learning sessions, either last year or earlier this year. If you have been to any of those, this slide probably looks a little bit familiar. So what we're saying here is that oftentimes in education, we tend to be data rich, but context poor. And I think this is what some of you were getting at in what you shared just a couple slides ago. Meaning we give lots of assessments, right? We collect lots of data points, maybe too many data points, right? There is such a thing as too much data, outside of the context of classroom instruction. While collecting instructional walkthrough data might feel like one more data point to add to the puzzle, it does provide an essential piece of information that can help move the needle for student learning. It helps us answer, how are the instructional decisions made over the course of a class impacting students' academic experience? So we tend to focus a lot on like output data, right? Attendance, behavior, assessments, those are all outputs, things that happen as a result of something else. Instructional walkthrough data helps get us some of that input data. What is happening in classrooms that might be leading to those assessment results, for example. So that gives us a little bit more context. Assessments, discipline, attendance, all of that gives us insight into what's happening, who is the most impact, where there are big discrepancies, but looking at those daily lived experiences of students through classroom instruction can help us shed light on the why, right? Why are behavior issues occurring? Why do assessment results look the way they do? Often the answer to those lies within classroom instruction if we just take the time to take a deeper look there. You might be familiar with this visual. This is the data-based decision-making process from the NEMTSS framework. So this process includes 5 steps to making sense of acting on data: identifying the problem, analyzing why it's occurring, action planning, and then implementing the solution and reflecting on what didn't work. Pretty straightforward. Most of us are probably used to seeing this and using either this or some similar approach to making data-driven decisions at the classroom level. But we also want to approach data in this way at the school-wide level as well to drive decisions about teacher development, resources, other infrastructure. So today we're going to practice just that. We're going to focus on kind of the first 3 steps of this process. Identifying a key instructional gap based on trends and walkthrough data. Analyzing that instructional gap to figure out the root causes. So we're going to ask ourselves why. Someone earlier said, just keep asking why. We're going to do a lot of that today. And then finally, making a plan to close the school-wide instructional gap with strategic solutions. So in doing this, we're going to hit the first 3 steps of this data-based decision-making process from the NEMTSS framework. So for this practice, we're going to be giving you a sample set of walkthrough data. We didn't ask you to come with your own data. So today we're all just going to practice using the same data set. Before we can even start on that first step of identifying a problem, identifying a gap from the data, we have to actually make sense of the data and organize it in a way that makes sense to us. So we're going to give you a few minutes right now to actually do just that. Open up the data set, reorganize it, color code it, whatever you need to do to be able to make sense from the data. You're going to have 7 minutes to do this independently. You have a link to the data set in your participant handout. And I believe Abby will also be dropping a link to it in the chat. And it will force you to make your own copy. So it's your own copy. You can do whatever you want to this spreadsheet. No one else is going to see it. Organize it in a way that makes sense to you. Before we start that work time, we've prepped a couple of quick videos to guide you through some ways that you could add filters and conditional formatting to make the data a little bit easier to read. So I'm going to play those first, and then we'll give you a little bit of work time.
How to add some filter options to your data. So first you want to select the row that you want to filter by. So because I want to filter information based off of whether it's different domains or indicators, I'm going to highlight my top row and click on this button where it says create a filter. And as you'll notice that there are now these green arrows in the upper right hand corner of each of the columns. And so now I can sort by the information. So maybe I want to sort it in A to Z order. I can maybe filter it by only the classrooms that got a not yet in this category. Maybe I could filter it by descending order. And what's great about this is that it filters the entire sheet so that you can continue to see how the information is organized. And of course, you can organize it by grade level and content area. Visual. This might be a hack that is really useful to you. So say for example, I'm like, man, I wish I could really see a color breakdown or have the information stand out a little more visually. So what I'm actually going to do is highlight all the places in my spreadsheet that I want to be color coded in some kind of way. And then I'm going to hit format and conditional formatting. And essentially what this does is it allows me to color code the information that's presented based on the data that's there. So for me, I know I really want to know, where are there really strong areas and where are there some areas that need a little bit more support. So, as you can see, there's different ways that you can identify the information. So I'm going to put is equal to, and I'm going to use some of the language that's already in the spreadsheet. So anything that is a yes, I'm going to have it be this default green. And I'm going to add another rule, and anything that is a mostly, I'm going to change the color so that it's slightly different, but still green because mostly is great. I'm going to add another rule where if it's somewhat, I'm going to have it be this yellow color here. I'm going to add another rule where if it is done not yet, I'll have it be this more red color.
I'm gonna pause it there because it seems like several folks can't hear it very well. So I'm just gonna ask Abby to share a direct link to each of these videos in the chat, just so if you want to, some of you probably already know how to do all this, but if you want to reference it, you have it available. And this is just tips on like how to organize the spreadsheet to make sense of it. So in just a second, we're gonna give you 7 minutes of independent time to play with that data set and start to identify what you're noticing and wondering about the data. You have some space in your participant handout to capture any of your initial takeaways. What am I noticing? What am I thinking about from this data? And we really do encourage you, even if you're in a room in person with your team, do this independently just to get a little bit more of that practice. Organizing data is a skill, and we're all going to do it a little bit differently based on how we like to process information. So play with the data in a visual way that works for you and your processing style. Are there any questions about what we're doing for the next 7-ish minutes? All right, take 7 minutes and then we will come back together. I think I saw a question that I want to clarify before we do some whole group sharing out. I think I saw a question somewhere in these slides around, are these different teachers? Assume that this data set is for a school. So whenever you see 6th grade math multiple times, that means multiple observations of that one 6th grade math classroom. When you see 12th grade ELA 3 different times, assume that's one teacher observed 3 different times. So for the purposes of this exercise, we're just going to make that assumption. All right, I know that was kind of quick, and you probably, some of you got several things typed in, some of you were just getting started, it looks like, but would love to kind of, would love to open it up to some sharing out. So take a minute right now before you share out whole group, take a minute to just skim through the other slides in that deck. Skim through the other things that people noticed and wondered about. And then I'd love to hear from folks, what are the benefits of having a diversity of perspectives looking over this data set? Did anyone see something on another slide where you were like, oh, I didn't notice that, or I didn't think about that?
Well, I'll be honest and say that I had no idea that you could color code like that. So I was just in awe over that. And to see that people called out the specific subjects, I didn't even get there. I was just looking at the headings, and yeah, this was really interesting.
Yeah, there's all kinds of cool things you can do with Google Sheets. Email me if you want a Google Sheets tutorial. But yeah, I love that you called out. I mean, people are getting really specific in what they're noticing here, right? Certain grade levels, certain subjects are stronger or need some more support. Thank you for sharing, Tessa. Let's hear from one or two other people. Did you either for either of these questions, what are the benefits of having a diversity of perspectives, or did you see something someone else noted in the slides that you hadn't noticed?
Well, I think it's important to have a variety of eyes on data. It keeps you or prevents you from being able to put smoke and mirrors in front of what you want to see. And allows for those different perspectives, those different lenses that people are going to come into data sets with.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? All right, we are going to take a break in just a minute, but before we get there, we've kind of dug into the data a little bit and started to notice some trends. What I want you to do now before we go off to a break is identify from these trends that you've noticed, identify what you think might be the most pressing instructional gap revealed by the data. So if this was data for your school, what would you want to focus on school-wide? What trend are you noticing where it might be a struggle for many teachers that you might want to figure out how to problem solve for? And to do that, consider, of course, looking at the lowest performing domains and then zeroing down to the lowest performing indicators. So where are you seeing a lot of not yets and somewhats, right? So take the next couple of minutes to skim through the data again if you need to, skim through other people's noticings if that's helpful for you. And then jot down in your handout, what is the instructional gap that you would problem solve for? What would you prioritize? All right, keep working if you need to, but we're gonna jump into our break to stay on time. And then when we come back after the break, you're gonna be sharing that gap that you identified with your school team. So be ready to share it with others. Let's take a 10-minute break. We will come back together at 10:20 and jump right into the next section. See you in 10 minutes. All right, welcome back. we're gonna stay right on time and get started. It is 10:20. Okay, so we just spent some time looking at the data and starting to make sense of it and identifying what are the gaps here. Which gap do I want to do something about? Now, the rest of the session, we're going to dive into turning that data into strategy. We see a problem. What can we do about it now? So we're moving into the analyze part of this NEMTSS framework, where we're going to be brainstorming some root causes of the gap that you've identified. So we're going to be asking ourselves why over and over again to figure out, why is this gap occurring? So we're going to ask you in a moment when we get into breakouts, we're going to ask you to imagine that this data set represents your school. And you might be saying, but there's high school classes here and I work at an elementary school. Just pretend. Just pretend that all of these teachers and all of this data represents instruction at your school. Our goal today, remember, is to focus on the process of looking at data within the context of our people, our needs, our climate, and our culture. So it's hard to brainstorm root causes if we're looking at data where we don't know who it belongs to, which is why we want you to pretend that this data represents instruction at your school. So before we send you off to jump into ideation, let's kind of align on our thinking and set some intentions around root causes. Identifying root causes can be challenging because it requires us to look beneath the surface, right? And that can be especially tricky when you're talking about people you know and care about. Sometimes it can be hard to be really honest with ourselves when we know, like, this teacher's working so hard and I know them personally, I know they're working hard. It can be hard to be honest and say, but they're not doing this right yet, right? But we want to encourage you to try to be as honest as you can in looking at this data so you can dig deep. And that might be a little bit easier today since this is fake data, right? Part of what helps us get beneath the surface is continuously asking why, like we've said throughout today. So when you're brainstorming root causes with your team, ask yourself, based on what I know about my staff and our history, why might this gap exist? And then why is that? And then why is that? And keep digging until you get to a root cause that you feel you can problem solve for. So what does that why process sound like? I'm going to do a quick think aloud and just give you an example so we can all kind of go in ready to just jump into the work in breakouts. So imagine that the data, this is all just made up. This might not actually reflect what's in the data set. But imagine that the data revealed that a key instructional gap is in the domain of essential content. Let's say that I noticed specifically that instructional materials in secondary ELA classrooms are not consistently grade appropriate. So I've identified that as the gap. Secondary ELA, not grade appropriate. When I ask myself why that gap might exist, I might recognize first and foremost, maybe it's because we don't have a curriculum adopted in secondary ELA yet. So teachers are creating all of their own stuff. So then I ask myself, well, why don't we have curriculum in secondary ELA? And I know my staff, and I know it's because they can be a little resistant to change. They're attached to their way of doing things. Okay, so I know now that teachers are making their own lessons, but then I want to ask myself, why are the lessons teachers are making, why are they not grade appropriate? Because there isn't standards alignment. Okay, why isn't there standards alignment in these lessons? Because it's been a really long time since we've had content-specific development for these teachers that looked at things like standards unpacking. So I know that my secondary ELA teachers haven't gotten a ton of support development on this particular thing. Let's say I keep asking myself why else might these materials not be grade appropriate? And I also have to be really honest with myself and say that I have heard some of these teachers complain that their students aren't reading grade level books because they can't. They're not at grade level yet. So I've heard teachers say, I'm swapping the books out with ones that are more on their level so I can meet students where they are. So at this point, through a series of asking myself why, I've identified and brainstormed a pretty solid list of reasons or root causes of secondary ELA materials not being grade appropriate. Obviously, I cannot problem solve for all of these, at least not immediately, right? So I want to do a little bit more digging to help me figure out which of these root causes do I want to do something about, and do I have the capacity to do something about in the short term. So once I've identified some root causes, let me erase all of this. Go back to my pointer. Once I brainstormed all of my root causes, then I want to ask myself which of these root causes need technical fixes and which might need more adaptive fixes. So generally, technical fixes can be solved with skill development, training, or resource sharing. So they tend to be a little, at times, in some cases, like a little easier and quicker to implement. While adaptive changes might require a more inquiry-based and multifaceted approach, which could take longer. So I want to think through my root causes, which of these require technical change, which require an adaptive change. I'm going to do some highlighting here to help me visually see it. So I go through this and identify all the root causes that I think require a technical change in orange, and all the root causes that I think require an adaptive change in green. This helps me just visually see which of these root causes my team and myself might be equipped to problem solve for currently. It doesn't give me an answer yet, but it helps me start narrowing down where can I do something about this gap. I'm gonna pause here for just a second. Are there any questions about this think aloud, or you're gonna engage in this same process in just a moment with your team? So are there any questions about what we're doing? Okay, so with that think aloud fresh in our minds, let's spend some time doing exactly that with your school team. So we understand that this data is likely not an apples to apples representation of your school offerings, size, or staff, but just imagine that it's your school being represented, and knowing what you know about your people, your school's culture, your current strengths and areas of growth. As a team, decide what will you identify as the root causes for the data you're seeing. Of course, the first thing you're going to want to do when you're with your group is to get aligned on the problem you want to solve for. So share that problem that you identified before the break, have everybody just quickly share and see what we're aligned on that we want to problem solve for, and then jump right into brainstorming root causes. And you have space in your handout that looks exactly like what was on my Think Aloud for you to capture all of these notes. Questions? Okay. Abby is going to open, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Abby, some opt-in breakout rooms that I will have the name of your school. So just you know your school. So jump into the room that is for your school. If you don't work at a school, if you're a district or ESU person, pick the school that you want to work with for the rest of this session. All right, Abby, whenever you're ready. All right, here we go. You have about 8 minutes. I popped into a couple of rooms, and I think Nadia popped into a couple others, and it seems like every group is in like a really different place. So I will just say we're gonna keep it moving, but when we get back into the next breakout, you'll be back with the same group. If you need to pick up the conversation where you left it off to finish identifying root causes, do that first before we get to the next piece. But I also am just gonna call on a group that I heard had some great thinking to share out with the whole group, if you don't mind, just to help people, give people another example of what this thought process sounds like. I heard the Huntington team had some great conversations. So can I get someone from the Huntington Elementary team to come off mute and voice over what is the gap you're problem solving for, and what are the root causes you identified for that gap?
So I'm the Lone Ranger today. My coworker is on a Title I trip, learning. But what I was thinking was that this instructional gap is very similar to what we're seeing in our school. And so what I chose was the student ownership #1, that students are not fully appropriately challenged in cognitive work. And so I was able to really think about some root causes that we are seeing in our building. And so that was kind of fun to really think through some things that we're seeing. And some root causes that I identified were just that sometimes when we push students with rigor, student behaviors increase. And so it's easier to just not push them. Our new teacher influx and just that continual rotation of new teachers. Then we continually have new teachers not being able to have that understanding of how to cognitively engage students. Just their tool belt isn't full of the tools yet. Coming from a 100% free and reduced lunch we have, that brings the struggles, things that come with students that come from poverty. Our professional learning sessions sometimes get canceled due to district initiatives that have to be shared. New teachers have limited capacity to learn multiple strategies to engage students. And so just thinking through some of those things, and then I could have gone on and on, but I chose that instructional gap, even though that really wasn't the lowest or the highest need of the student ownerships, because I was thinking that one really fed the rest of the strands. And so I was just thinking that if this one gets really, really solid, then the other ones can also just naturally get better, in my opinion.
Thank you for sharing and being a team of one today. I hope that hearing another example kind of helped. If you were struggling a little bit with this, hopefully that helped you hear what it can sound like to say, hey, I'm going to prioritize this for XYZ reasons. And here are all the reasons, endless reasons that this gap could be happening, right? So we're going to talk through the next step and then go back for a chunk of work time to your same groups. So imagine that you've now determined some root causes of whatever gap you're focusing on. The next thing you want to do is move into figuring out a solution, right? How can we solve for these root causes? So when we're thinking about strategic solutions, it can be helpful to utilize resources that you already have available, like the core rubric. So let's go back to that secondary ELA assignments example I was talking about in the root causes from earlier, where the assignments are not grade appropriate. Since that is in the essential content domain of my core rubric, I'm looking at the core teacher skills in that part of the rubric. But now I'm kind of examining those skills through the specific lens of my secondary ELA teachers. And I'm thinking about which of these skills are they maybe struggling with? And let's say I realize that there are a few of these skills that capture what my secondary ELA teachers might need development with. This just gives me a little bit more focus and gets me one step closer to potentially landing on a solution to help teachers close the instructional gap. So with those core teacher skills in mind, the next thing I want to do is start to just brainstorm some of those solutions. So again, it's sort of a brain dump. So I'll just kind of talk through some sample solutions. So if I'm the school leader where my secondary ELA teachers are not creating grade level lessons, some things I could do. I could offer training on how to make standards aligned lessons. I could maybe offer training on the research behind grade appropriate texts and assignments if I feel like they need some more of that research base. I could start the process of adopting high quality instructional materials. Maybe they just really need some curriculum to use, right? I could offer development on close reading to help teachers understand how to make meaning of grade level texts. Let's say at my school, PLCs are a big thing and people are really bought into the PLC structure. So I could potentially leverage our PLCs to focus on reaching struggling secondary readers without lowering the bar. Or I could choose to maybe prioritize the one-on-one coaching. Maybe I just continue with like individual coaching with each secondary ELA teacher to work on their mindsets around low expectations of their students. So this is just a kind of brain dump list of possible solutions. And now once I've come up with this list, I again want to narrow it down because as superhuman as any of us might be, we can't do all of these solutions, especially not in the short term, right? So I want to think about which of these solutions can be acted on immediately or within this next semester, which we're defining as short term. And then which of these solutions might require longer term planning because they might require like change management strategies. So again, I'm going to go back in and highlight my solutions just to help me visually see. So I've highlighted my short-term solutions in orange and my longer-term solutions in green. So all this does is help me start to see what can I start working towards like next week to start closing this gap, whatever the gap is that I've identified. And then finally, once I've kind of thought through solutions, the next thing I want to do is pick one. Which of these solutions do I want to start like immediately putting into place to start closing this gap? Let's say in this example, I've decided that I want to leverage our PLCs. I want to shift the focus of the rest of the PLCs for the year. For my secondary ELA teachers, those PLCs are now just going to focus on standards unpacking and planning lessons aligned with the standards. That's all we're going to work on. Once I've identified a solution, then I want to start anticipating roadblocks. So you might remember this visual here, this pyramid from our last session. This pyramid helps us think about, if I'm implementing this solution, what are the learning gaps teachers might have that could hinder progress, that could get in the way of this solution being successful, right? So now that I'm, for example, let's say with this particular solution, maybe I know that my teachers have some knowledge gaps in their understanding of the standards, like some of them don't even know where to find their standards. Maybe I also know that some of my secondary ELA teachers have a skill gap. Maybe some of them have a capacity gap. They feel like they have no additional time to plan better lessons. So I want to think through these roadblocks so I can think about how can I proactively address them. If I know capacity is an issue for them, I don't want to give them a huge new thing to do. I want to try to give them a really simple, streamlined process that can help them focus their lesson planning instead of a whole new thing, right? If I know that they don't have the skill to plan lessons backwards from standards, again, maybe I want to give them like a 3 to 5 step, here's how to do that. Something simple, straightforward, easy to manage. So just thinking through these learning gaps can help you, again, sort of focus and tailor your solutions. Questions about any of this think aloud before we go back to your groups to keep working? Okay, we're going to go back to those same groups. If you did not finish your root causes conversation, finish that first, and then move into the making the plan piece where you'll start to identify a solution and kind of brainstorm how could we enact that solution. Let's see. You're going to take 15 minutes to work through these steps that are outlined in your handouts. You can kind of just go through them in order. Identify solutions, highlight, determine which one you want to implement, etc. You might not get down to step 5 here around planning specific actions. That is okay. We want you to just engage in this process of thinking about, I went from this huge chunk of data and now I'm like really funneling it down and narrowing it down to one thing that I want to do something about. Questions? We are going to have, after this, just a preview, after this work time, we'll have one more quick break. And after that, you're going to be paired up with someone random from a different school to share your plan. So be prepared to speak to your plan, even if there's like 5 of you in a room and 1 or 2 people are doing more of the talking, all of you are going to be going to need to be prepared to share your plan with someone else. All right, let's open up those breakout rooms again, Abby. Welcome back. I was in the ESU 10 room. They were having some really meaty, thoughtful conversations about data analysis from the ESU level. So I hope that this time with your group was useful. We just did some like deep thinking. So we're going to take another quick 5-minute break here before we jump into the last chunk of our session. And during this time, if you have questions or any confusion like coming out of your breakout, if you were like, I'm not sure what to do here, feel free to pop it in the chat. Even if we can't answer it now, we'll make note of that question and we can follow up with you one-on-one. All right, let's take a 5-minute break and let's just round it up. We'll come back at 11:15. All right, what's planned for this next chunk is to share with a partner, but I think different groups are in different places. So we're just going to do a quick poll. I've just launched this poll and you should see it pop up on your screen. What would you prefer to do next? Select one of these. We need more time to keep working with our school team, or our plan's not perfect, but we're ready to share with another team to get some feedback. Take a second to just answer this, and then we'll shift gears accordingly. So far, this poll is proving unhelpful because it's about half and half. Waiting for a couple more responses to come in to see if the tide shifts. Okay, it looks like, all right, now we got a majority. It looks like most of us would like some more time to keep working with our school teams. So we will do that. We'll go back to, I'm just going to put this work time slide up again. All of these steps, by the way, are directly in your participant handout. So you can just follow along there. We'll give you some more work time. If you're one of the teams that said we're ready to share with others, and you really don't want that more work time, just let us know in the chat, and Abby and I can work to like put you in another breakout with another team so that you guys can still share and get something meaningful out of this next chunk of time. All right, Abby, let's open up those same breakouts. We'll go back to continuing the conversation, continuing your work time to identify a solution, and let us know in the chat if you want to share with someone else.
Namisha, it's going to take me a second. I'm sorry. I had already created the breakout rooms based on what we had planned, and now I have to go rename all 22 breakout rooms real fast. So give me just 1 minute and then I'll open them.
Abby, I see them all. Can I just open them?
Sure, if you're able to get them, go for
Let's
it.
see if it works. All right, that probably felt fast. But we do want to make sure we get out of here on time. So we'd actually, in the last chunk of time, we're going to share a couple of resources that might be helpful as you think about applying this, like continuing this work in your own context on the ground. But before we get into that, I'd love to close out this practice part of our session with just some general reflections here. So take a couple minutes to think about these questions independently. They are different than what's in your handout. We made a game time change here. And then I would love for you to share either in the chat or come off of mute to share out whole group. So we'll take a couple of minutes of independent think time and then sharing out on, think about this whole process be engaged in. Organizing the data, identifying that gap, brainstorming root causes, considering and brainstorming solutions, and then starting to action plan for a particular solution. What was similar to or different from how you usually think about data? And what was helpful? And what was challenging? We'll take 2 minutes independent think time and then we'll share out. All right, it's been about 2 minutes. Thank you, Angie and the DAWS team for kicking us off. Feel free to share in the chat and or come off mute to share reflections on either of these questions.
I guess I would say the overall process is very interesting, you know, starting from even getting the data and just looking at it, but going through the whole process, need to understand, like, we work with districts and sometimes they look at us or maybe ESU people and say, well, what do you notice? And just tell us what you see. And, you know, and I think the importance of teams actually going through and finding out themselves and asking those questions and having the discussions themselves is probably 1,000 times more important and meaningful and sustainable than it is for us to come in or someone to come in and say, well, this is what I noticed. And so making sure that we allow time and a lot more time, and I know we're on a time frame, but when we do this with districts, giving them ample time to go through this, still staying on task, but time for them to really delve into it, because this is not something that they do or even we do on a continuous basis where we can go like, yeah, now do this, now do this, now do this. So I think it's very helpful, but again, it's a time thing, and who's going to be involved in it, I think, is just as important.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm gonna also call out something Denise from ESU 10 said in an earlier breakout, which I think relates to what you're sharing. And Denise, jump in if I'm misstating what you said, but you shared something about like maybe something we can do from an ESU level when schools or districts come to us and say, can you help us with X? To then say, sure, yeah, we'd be happy to help. What data tells you that this is the thing that you need help with? Like, put it back on them and help them identify, like, what are the data points? What are you seeing in classrooms that's telling you this is the area that needs more attention? Let's hear from a couple other folks.
I thought we were pretty strong in identifying the challenges or the gaps and maybe why some of those gaps are in place. And then the solution part and just being able to monitor that efficiently was an area that I think we fall down a lot. Like we'll do a walkthrough and we'll say, okay, hey, you know, these are some recommendations we have, and just that's not how I do things. This is how I've always done this. Or yeah, but we could do this better. Isn't always received well, and I don't know, the feedback that we give, maybe we need to look at, okay, so if we provide it, the first time we provide feedback like this, and if it's still not making that change, then is there another way we could provide feedback and support that would be more acceptable if it didn't stick the first time, I guess.
Yeah, part of this I love what you shared, because part of this process is that it's recursive, right? Like you might think you're going down one path and then you get another round of data and realize what we tried to do isn't working. So let's go back to the drawing board. Do we need to try something different? Do we need more data? Do we need to dig a little bit deeper? I'm gonna call on, can I get someone from the DAWS team to share a little bit more about what's in the chat here, thinking about the gap first rather than student outcomes. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I think sometimes when we look at data, we're looking at student outcomes. And that can lead us to thinking of, what are student deficiencies or strengths or behaviors? And when we look at gaps, I'm thinking through the lens of our cognitive coaching training in Lincoln Public Schools. When we look at those gaps, we can really drill down into our coaching at where does that teacher need us to support and coach to get the outcomes with the students rather than looking at the student outcomes first.
I love that. Thank you. And that ties in a little bit, I think, with what Sarah maybe put in the chat around like basically triangulating data, like looking at different data sets to see, here's what instructional data is telling me, here's what student outcome data is telling me, what's the connection, what's the story, what's the big picture. Anyone else want to share before we move on? One other thing I'll just emphasize, I see Travis's comment in the chat around something, you know, years ago when you guys did this root cause analysis, you probably picked something that was a symptom and something that was out of your control. Thank you so much for naming that, because I do want to emphasize that part of this process, when you identify a ton of root causes, you are going to identify things that you can't do anything about. But you are also going to identify things that you can do something about. So I just want you to, like, I hope you leave with this thought of like, whatever gap exists in instruction at your school, there is something you can start doing or stop doing tomorrow or next week to start taking baby steps toward closing that gap. Even if there are giant things that are out of your control, there are things that we can be doing to start moving in the right direction. Okay, in our last chunk of time, we just want to share a resource that might be helpful for you, and then give you a little bit of time to start prepping for pre-work for our last session. So we're going to give you 5 minutes right now to just look through what we are calling a walkthrough data analysis guide. This is linked in your participant handout, and Abby is also going to pop it in the chat. This is a guide. It is not an end-all be-all. It doesn't have like all of the things you should think about for every data set. We just kind of put this together in case it's helpful for you to take your learning from today's session and replicate it. So what we'd like to give you some time to do now is just skim over this tool and then just jot down in your handout, how was what you did today, your processing with your team, similar or different from what's in this guide? And what parts of this might you want to incorporate into your data analysis protocol, if you will, moving forward. All right, let's do 5 minutes here of just skimming through the resource, and then we will move on. keep it moving, but I just wanted to again emphasize that this is just a resource that you can use if you'd like to help you jumpstart your process of using walkthrough data to take informed action. All right, I'm going to do a quick preview of our pre-work for session 5, so then you can spend the last 10 minutes of today's session figuring out what you need to get in place to be able to do this pre-work. So before we meet again in session 5, which is not until April, so April 11th, so it's like 2 months from now, kind of a long time. Between now and April 11th, there's 2 kind of big chunks of things that we're asking you to do. Gather data. So go do observations, observe enough classrooms that you can start identifying trends, whether across your whole school or within a department. If you're like, if reading is a priority and you just want to focus on your reading teachers, okay. As you observe, track your data somewhere that you can make sense of it all later. So if you already have a system for all of this, like keep doing what you're doing. You don't have to go like make anything new. And you can observe using the core rubric if that's what is working for you. But if you're using a different tool at your school or district, like use that. Identify trends based on whatever tool you are using. We want this to be meaningful data for you. So gather all that data. And then the second piece is kind of go through the process that we went through today. Take some time to look at all of that data you've gathered, analyze it, figure out, are there trends here? Is there a gap kind of across the board that we can problem solve and figure out how to address? And we will be asking you to submit your kind of thinking, your analysis and your action plan to Google Classroom. There's not a template for this. This can kind of look however you want it to look. Again, if you have your own process and templates for this that you're already engaging in, just keep doing what you're doing. We're not asking you to do anything new. We just want to see your thinking. When you look at walkthrough data, what do you identify as the gap? What do you identify as root causes and solutions? Are there questions about the pre-work? Okay, take the next, let's do 7 minutes actually, to start figuring out the logistics of this. So you know that this is the stuff you need to do over the next 2 months. So take 8 minutes to think about which classrooms will you observe, how and where will you collect the data. And we linked a couple of templates in your participant handout if you want to use them. Obviously they're aligned to the core rubric. So if you're not using the core rubric, they won't be helpful. But the spreadsheet template that's linked in there has color coding in it already. So you can mess around with that to see if it's something you want to use. Who's going to support you with observing and action planning? And when are you going to give yourself some deadlines? When are you going to get the observations done? When are you going to get the analysis done to get this submitted before April 11th? So you can do this on your own or with your school team. If you want us to send you to a breakout, just let us know in the chat. Otherwise, we'll just take about 7 minutes here and then we will close out. All right, y'all. We made it. We made it to the end. Thanks for sticking with us. In these last few minutes, we'd love for you to just take the time to take our exit survey before you log off so that you don't have to think about it later and you can ignore our follow-up email because you've already done it. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to keep this last slide up with just a reminder of our pre-work for session 5. And again, we'll send this in a follow-up email, but before you log off, you have 8 minutes here. Take time, take a couple minutes to just fill out our feedback survey, and then enjoy the rest of your day. If you want to share in the chat before you go something fun you're doing this weekend, that'd be great too. Thank you all for joining us. Wow, how did I forget about the Super Bowl, Molly? This tells you how much I care about football.